Hey guys, and welcome to the first of this mini-series looking at logging in Python 3. If you're new to logging or you've never really used it in Python, I'm hoping this series will be of some benefit. So in a nutshell, let's just start off by talking about what logging actually is. So suppose you've got a program, you've got a class, you've got a couple of functions, and your program is being ran all day long. Some situations that might be okay. However, what if your program is being used by other people and there's errors during runtime? How are you going to know about those errors? Either them people come and complain to you that the code's not working, or you find out just by seeing the program crash. Either way, they're not ideal situations. The idea of logging is that we can basically make our Python code spit out some information during its runtime, either to the console down here or to some kind of file of our choosing. So periodically we can look at these logs and basically look at how well the program is operating. So we can ask it to tell us if things are going okay, if there's been any kind of warning situation, if the program has crashed, or if there's been some kind of error with user input. The idea is that we kind of put in logging statements throughout our code at key points to our choosing to basically tell us what is going on in the program. I'm going to flick over to a slide real quick to show you kind of some basic concepts of logging first. So say, for example, our program is running and everything's going completely smooth. There's no issues, there's no exceptions being raised, everyone's nice and happy. We can use an info statement to say, this has happened, so on and so forth, just to give us information that, yeah, everything's fine, no problem at all. Let's suppose part of our program allows the user to make an input, but maybe in some situations a certain input can make our program crash. That might then be a use case for an error or a critical log statement here. And of course, you'd use these in different situations. If things are cool, we can use info to say, yeah, this is good. Or the user enters maybe an incorrect password or, whatever. We could use error or critical here. We've also got debug and warning as well. Warning, to be honest, I don't use a whole lot here, but generally we use this to warn about situations that aren't quite errors, but we're not also saying things are fine and dandy. So these are things in between as well. Then we have debug at the top here. This is basically used to show really kind of minute, fine, kind of granular level detail here. If you're familiar with the requests module, or anything kind of where we're using a module to talk to an API, if you enable debug mode here, you can often see really kind of fine granular information as to what request is going out and what's coming back. But yeah, it's a perfectly valid thing to use this. So just one more time, use this to show really fine level granular stuff. Use this to show kind of everyday messages back to the screen to say this has happened, everything's fine. Use this to show anything that's potentially troublesome but isn't quite going to cause an error. Use this to show any errors that might be occurring during runtime. Then we use critical for like the worst case scenario. So you might use this if the program is actually at risk of completely crashing and going on fire and making everyone panic, etc. And that's it. And of course, when we jump back into VS Code, I'll show you examples of these 5 as well. Flipping over to our logging locations here. Now you can be really flexible with this. In this video, I'm going to show a basic example of just going into the console and then to the file here. In more of a professional setting, we're going to want to generally log to both. And in future videos, we're going to make custom loggers that can go to the console and to the file here. Now, the reason why you want to do both, for your kind of file logging, this is more for what we call a persistent log here. So what we can do, we can set up a rotating log later on. So, we might keep 10 files, and after maybe all 10 files are full, we can delete the oldest file and then log to a new file here. This kind of keeps like a long-term record of how the program is running, which is updated every time a new log entry from one of these 5 statements comes along. Finally, we can log to the console as well. So on any kind of like Linux system, if you're running your program kind of round the clock, you could use something like systemctl to basically look at the console logs and see what's going on here. Personally, I prefer to log to both. I tend to log the most important information to the console, and I tend to log everything to file here. Of course, you're not going to be reading those files all the time, This is kind of like your long-term, kind of hardcore persistent log in here. So without further ado, let's go back into VS Code and take a look at how to do this. Okay, so I'm in VS Code. I've got a fresh window open, and the first one we're going to do is import logging here. And there we go. Logging's included in the standard library, so don't bother trying to install it. It's already there and it's good to go. And then the first thing you want to kind of figure out, and of course with this being like our introductory video, we're going to do kind of our initial setup, but I want to keep it just really brief for the time being here. In future we'll do kind of more complex setups and then go from there. But the first thing we got to do is decide what level we want to kind of make the logging happen at, if that makes sense. If that doesn't, it's fine, I'll do it in a bit more detail in just a second. So the first thing we do is we initialize this basic config function here, and all I'm going to do is do level is equal to logging dot, and let's do debug here. Now I'm going to write down the levels just a second. I'll do them like this here. So we have debug, info, warning, we then have error, and we then have critical here. If I can actually, forgive me, it's been a long weekend. There we go, critical, there we go. So this is really important because, of course, depending on what your program is and depending on how you want things to show, you want to kind of choose from the offset, like what level do I want to see things happen at? If you do debug, that means you're going to see debug messages and everything underneath it. If you were to do something like this, let's do warning, there we go, hit run, check that's out. Yeah. If you did this, for example, you would only see warning messages and below. So just something to bear in mind here, and I'll show you an example of this in just a second. So I'm going to quickly do logging.debug. Let's do debug message here. I'm going to quickly, what I'll copy and paste this a few times, and then I'll bring the video back when they're all there. Here we go. Here's one I prepared earlier, as they say. So let me show you how this all works here. So I've got 5 statements: debug, an info, a warning, an error, and a critical here. And at the moment, I'm just kind of putting in some vague strings here. So recall, as I said, if you were to do, if you to set this up to say, show me warning and above, basically, that means we're only going to see the warning and errors and criticals, right? So basically this and these two here. So if we hit run there, we see the warning, the error, the critical. If we were to ask to say, okay, only show me infos and above, that means we're going to see the info and above. So we should see the info, the warning, the error, and the critical. And prove that, we'll clear the screen, hit run, and there we go. Just to kind of catch everything here, we'll do logging.debug, which means we're going to show absolutely everything here. Debug, info, warning, error, and critical here. So in a nutshell, that's the basics of it here. So we do our initial setup, and choosing kind of what level you want to see things happen at. In this case here, we're simply going to the console. That's why we're seeing things in the terminal here. And then we have our 5 messages. So if something really bad happens, we could do an error. If something even worse than that happens, we can do a critical. We can use our infos to say, yeah, something's happened, that's absolutely fine. Let's build this one of these into a function and go from there. Let's suppose we had a really simple function called add, for example. Let's suppose add, this takes in A and B. Let's suppose these are both integers here. And first thing we could do is we could do logging.info. And we'll log this as an F string actually. So if I do this, we can say add func has been called with inputs. Let's do A, B, like that. So a fairly trivial example, but that's completely fine. That would work. And if I was to do return A plus B here, hit run, check all is okay. So now if we were to then go ahead and call this function, if I were to do add and do 10 and 20, we can see that the logger has said info. The add func has been called for inputs 10 and 20. Let's do maybe something a bit more granular. Let's then do a debug here. Let's maybe say, for reference, so we can say this will return, let's do another f string, a plus b, like this. So bear in mind, because our logging level is set to debug, I would expect to see this. And I do. Suppose our logging level has been changed to say show me info and above. We no longer see this because we're only seeing info. So we would see info, warning, error, and critical. Now suppose I wanted to catch an error. What I'm going to do for this one, because obviously this, if I was to kind of catch this not working, maybe you pass it in an integer and a string. Of course, that's going to get raised here as well. So I'm going to just for a second remove this and just try something. Suppose if I passed in, let's do 10 and 30 as a string, that's going to raise a type error here. So what we could do, just to be a bit fancier, we could say try and do this computation, except I will catch the general exception here as exe. And then what we can then do, if I just I'll do return 0, but just above it here, I'm going to do logging.error, and we can say an error occurred in the add function, and then make that an f string, put an f string here, pass in this error there, and now let's clear the screen and try this again. Okay, so we can see if we go through that from the top, we're logging at debug, which means we're going to be catching effectively everything. So we can see add func has been called of these inputs, A and B, we can see that here. And then what happens is, of course, the try executes, it tries to do this, and of course you can't add an integer to a string. So we caught the exception, and the first thing we did when catching the exception was we then did logging.error. In this case, we just simply logged an f string with the exception at the end here. So let's see what we got. An error occurred in the add function, and then we did this bit here. So this bit here is actually that exe. So this exe is returned here from exception. And in practice, this is generally what we do. So any kind of function or class or method that is doing some kind of taking in some inputs, doing some computations, this is pretty standard practice to do this. What you might actually also do, if you want to be really kind of pedantic, is you might do something like this. So we can say A is, let's do this here, of type blank. So if I do A is A, no, it's not a capital A, it's a normal A, like that. This would get super low level. We'll do B, B, and B like that. So if I hit run again, there we go. So yeah, so if you were being super pedantic, and we tend to do this a fair amount at work as well, it's quite common to kind of log what's going into a function, possibly what type those inputs are as well. And because they're going to debug, you might then be choosing just to do your debug statements to file. So basically this wouldn't show in the console, but we would see the info and the error log in the console. So if you envision this program kind of running lots and lots and lots, if you were to look at the kind of general log in the console, you would just see, okay, I can see the function is running, and I might see, if an error does ever happen, I would see that here as well. But then if you were to then go and open the log file, you would then see these debug statements as well. In general, just to recap, we've done an info, a debug, and an error. Our info is just showing kind of our general day-to-day, here's what's happened, and that's absolutely fine. Our debug statement is showing kind of the more low-level, kind of granular, microscopic details of what's happening in the program. We've also used .error as well. So this is basically saying, something has gone wrong during the runtime of the program, so we use this statement to then basically say, it's happened. Just makes it so that, if this was hundreds of lines, it's quite easy to scan down and see, okay, let's find out where the errors are. And, you could use grep, or you could do a find to go straight for those statements. Next up, let's show you how to make our outputs here look a little bit fancier. So when we're logging, we often want to include some information such as obviously the level, the time, and the message. And this is kind of the standard string. It's a standard string I use anyway. And I've seen this quite a lot in other places. So if you're looking for kind of ways to format your logs in a nice way, you'll probably come across this as well, especially on things like Stack Overflow. So all we do, we go behind this, and we do format equals this here. So what happens now is, rather than just doing like info this here, it includes the ASCII time. You have the level, so the level of of info debug error, separated by these little hyphens, followed by the message. I'm going to hit run first, check it's okay, and then we're going to call this function. So let's call it without the error first. Hit run, and there we go. So we've got our ASCII time up front here. We've then got a dash that corresponds to this dash here, followed by the level, followed by the message here. And of course, let's just try, so let's do this, set this to info level, clear the screen. So because we're now doing info, I won't expect to see the debug statements in the output anymore. So we see our function there, it's all happy. Let's make it not be happy for a second. Let's do some various symbols, and there we go. And for me, I don't know about you, but if I was, if I was having to parse through this output here, I find this personally quite pleasing to look at. It's really simple to see, it's really easy and simple to spot kind of, when an error has happened versus when an info statement has happened here. But this is all optional. This could be, could do it like that. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, I generally tend to use ASCII time, what level, and then the message here. Now, the last thing I want to show in this kind of introductory session is how to make this output to a file rather than the terminal. So I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to kind of reset this, and then we'll use a slightly different example to kind of get things rolling. Okay, so for this next bit, I've just got rid of that function down below, and suppose you want to log to a file here. So let me show you my folder setup. I've got my December folder here, it's where I am currently. I just do pwd, there I am, ls, I've just got main.py here. So if I just do file name, actually what we could do, would be really fancy, split it all up like that, there we go. And if I do file name is equal to log.out here. In terms of what you kind of call your log files, it can be .txt. I tend to do .out or something.log, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. Whatever works for you is absolutely fine here. And in future sessions, we'll go through kind of how to make this fancier, so how to make only certain things go to certain files. That's all with custom log handlers. We hit run, make sure there's no error. But what we can see is now this log.out file has appeared. And what we're going to do for this one is, you can notice I've imported request as well. We're going to build a function that makes a basic GET request, and we're then going to try and log some of the output to our file here. So let's go ahead and do that. Got a simple function called make GET request here. Suppose this takes in a URL. I would assume this to be a string, and we're going to simply make it return the status code here. So we'll do return status code for URL. Okay, bear in mind just something to mention, requests is pip installable. It doesn't come with standard library, so make sure that is installed. You can just do pip install requests to get that installed here. So what's going to happen is, I'm going to do req is equal to rq.get URL, and we're just going to do return req.status code here like this. Hit run, and then what I'm going to do first is just do make get request and just pass in hello, pass in a string which isn't a URL, and let's see what happens. Okay, of course, that isn't going to work because that's not a URL. So what we might want to do first then is make some basic kind of exception handling around this with appropriate logging, and that appropriate logging is then going to go into here. So let's do something here. Let's do try, and let's do this all indented here. Okay, and then let's do accept. Now what you could do, you could try and catch this as like a specific error. I'm going to be a bit naughty and just do accept exception as exe. So I'll catch a general exception for this here. And then we'll do logging.error. And we can say, let's not say logging error, we'll say an error occurred during the get request. And then we'll pass this exe into here. So if I do f and then pass in exe. And then what I'll do return. And you could return 404 technically, because that doesn't didn't find it. That's fine. So we'll log an error, and then we'll return 404 here. So if I do clear and hit run, notice how we didn't see that log appear to the screen. However, you go to log.out, and there's our file here. So if I hit run a few more times, and there we go. Look at that. And in practice, that's what we'd do. We would log to a file, and then over time you can open this file. We can see when things happened. We can see what level that is logged at, and then followed by some kind of message here. Let's make it a bit more granular. Let's do a debug statement at the top. So we can say func called with. We'll pass in URL in here. Oh, not like that. Let's do URL in there just like this. Hit run again. Of course, because we're doing info, I wouldn't expect to see it. However, if I was to do logging.debug, I'm not going to catch the debug statements and above. So we'll clear the screen up, hit run, and there we go. I can see my debug statement is in the log file, and I can see, of course, looking at the time, 2010:59:091, an error happened right after that as well. Yeah, good stuff. Let's go ahead and do an else here. Let's just do... I know I could catch this earlier on and return it here. So I'm just going to do this here, try accept. Let's do... If I get rid of this here, that'll be fine. So what'll happen here is if the try is successful, then it'll jump down to the else, and then I'll do the status code from REQ. So if I pass in one that is correct, if I do HTTPS, let's do... No, not that. Here we go. Google.co.uk. Let's just hit run. That was fine. We got 200, so that's pretty good. Let's see what logged. We can see that debug was called here. And now this is something really interesting. See how I didn't actually... Like if we look at these messages here for a second, we can see func called of Google, and then we got these here. It's like, well, hang on, where did they come from? I certainly didn't do that. They actually came from the request module. So this start a new HTTPS connection here, that came from here, which is pretty cool. That's because the request module logs, but obviously you can see it logging at its debug level here. So let me try something. If I get rid of that and save it, change this to info, because request is logging at the debug level, we hit run, we don't see that here. Of course, that's what kind of like, going back to what I said earlier about it being more granular. Like obviously we know that this is being called with this URL here. That's why that comes as a debug statement, because it's granular, kind of fine level information. So hit run, see it in the log there, and there we go. Now let's do, I think this would be nice to do an info statement. We can say successful call with this URL. We got this. Autocorrect seems to be terrible today. I do apologise. I will pass in this request.status code here. I'll be pretty happy with that. That's hit run. There we go. Nice. Successful call with google.co.uk. We got 200. And in a nutshell, that's it. So I think for the first video, I think let's just do a quick recap at the top. We always import logging, and you do your basic configuration right at the top here. Of course, we can choose to log at a certain level. So if you do logging.debug, that means we catch debug and everything else above it. So you're going to be catching debug, catching info, warning, error, critical. Of course, if you choose to log at a high level, you only get those messages and above. So of course, just bear in mind basically the needs of your program, like basically like what do you want to catch in your logs. If you pass in a file name, it'll kind of direct, rather than going to the terminal, it'll direct all of your logs into a file of your choosing, such as this one. And then the format here, this is basically how you want your logs to show. So this is ASCII time, -level, -messages. So yeah, there we go, time, level, and message here. And then finally, we looked at sort of two, kind of, I guess this is a fairly kind of real life ish example, I suppose. So things like we've done a debug statement at the top to show kind of what the function's being called with. We've shown how we can use logging.error to kind of make aware in the logs that something untoward has happened. And of course, we can use logging.info to basically say, yep, this has happened. I'm just going to put this in the logs to let you know. Yeah, but in terms of future videos, I'm going to, I think in the next one we'll look at things like custom loggers. We'll look at how to do a rotating log handler and how to kind of look at some more complex use case as well. So make sure you stay tuned for those sessions. Cheers for watching, guys. I hope you all have a great week and see you soon. Cheers.